The boarding door slammed shut, sealing the fate of 200 passengers, while a father stood at the gate, utterly humiliated, gripping his 7-year-old daughter's hand. He had just been barred from Flight 409 for no justifiable reason. The gate agent smirked, the security guards crossed their arms, and the massive Boeing 777 pushed back from the jet bridge. But less than 12 minutes later, the relentless, chaotic hum of JFK's Terminal 4 didn't just quiet down. It stopped. Every departure screen flashed crimson. Every cell phone buzzed in unison, and the family that had just been denied boarding realized the airline hadn't ruined their lives. They had just saved them. The fluorescent lights of John F. Kennedy International Airport beat down on Nicholas and Iris Hayes as they navigated the endless corridors of Terminal 4. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of busy, frantic evening where thousands of travelers blurred together in a sea of rolling suitcases and half-finished coffees. But for the Hayes family, this wasn't a business trip or a casual vacation. This was the most important journey of their lives. Walking between them, holding firmly to her parents' hands, was 7-year-old Lily. She wore a bright yellow backpack, clutching a stuffed rabbit she called Barnaby. Lily was pale, her breathing shallow, her energy carefully conserved. She suffered from a rare, aggressive congenital heart defect that American insurance companies had deemed inoperable. But Nicholas and Iris had refused to accept that death sentence. For 2 grueling years, they had fundraised, mortgaged their home, and worked triple shifts to secure an appointment with Dr. Arthur Penhaligon, a world-renowned pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon operating out of a private clinic in London. Flight 409 to Heathrow wasn't just an airplane. It was Lily's lifeline. The surgery was scheduled for Thursday morning. If they didn't make this flight, they would lose their deposit, lose the operating window, and potentially lose their daughter. "Almost there, sweetie," Nicholas said, his voice a soothing, deep rumble. He forced a smile he didn't feel, adjusting his grip on the handle of their carry-on. "We'll be on the big plane soon. You can watch all the cartoons you want." "Can I have apple juice?" Lily asked softly, coughing into her elbow. "All the apple juice they have," Iris promised, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. Iris's hands were trembling slightly. She hadn't slept in 3 days, consumed by the logistical nightmare of transporting a medically fragile child across the Atlantic. They arrived at Gate B22. The boarding area was packed, a chaotic mix of tourists, business executives, and students. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the silhouette of the transatlantic jet loomed in the twilight. Nicholas felt a wave of profound relief wash over him. They had made it. The grueling TSA lines, the anxiety of the traffic on the Van Wyck Expressway. It was all behind them. When the intercom crackled, calling Group 2 for boarding, Nicholas gathered their passports and freshly printed boarding passes. They approached the desk. Standing behind the podium was a gate agent with a perfectly pressed uniform and a name tag that read Brenda. She had sharp, evaluating eyes that seemed to sweep over Nicholas, Iris, and Lily with a practiced, icy detachment. "Passports and boarding passes," Brenda said, not looking up from her monitor. Nicholas handed them over, keeping Lily close to his side. Brenda scanned Nicholas's pass. A loud, jarring beep echoed from the scanner, accompanied by a flashing red light on the screen. Brenda sighed, her jaw tightening. She typed something furiously into her keyboard, then scanned Iris's pass. Another harsh red beep. Finally, Lily's pass. Beep. "There seems to be an issue," Brenda said, her tone devoid of any customer service warmth. She finally looked up, her gaze hardening. "Your tickets have been flagged." "Flagged?" Nicholas asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. Flagged for what? We bought these tickets months ago directly through the airline. The system doesn't specify to me, sir. It just says boarding denied, security override. You're going to have to step aside. Iris stepped forward, panic instantly rising in her chest. Step aside? What do you mean? We're Group 2. Our daughter is sick. We are traveling to London for a life-saving medical procedure. We cannot miss this flight. Brenda crossed her arms over her chest, leaning back slightly as if offended by Iris's urgency. Ma'am, I understand you're stressed, but raising your voice isn't going to change the computer. The system says you are denied. I cannot let you down that jetted bridge. I'm not raising my voice, Iris pleaded, tears instantly pricking the corners of her eyes. I'm just explaining that there must be a glitch. Can you please refresh the screen? Look up the reservation number. It's PR78XQ. Nicholas placed a gentle hand on Iris's shoulder, a silent signal to let him handle it. He knew the dynamics of the world too well. He knew that as a tall black man in a crowded airport, any display of justifiable anger or frustration would immediately be weaponized against him. He had to be a ghost of emotion. He had to be perfectly, unshakably polite. Ma'am, Nicholas said, his voice exceptionally calm, pitching an octave lower to ensure he sounded non-threatening. I have the receipts right here on my phone. I have the confirmation from your airline's corporate office. I even have the clearance letter from Lily's cardiologist stating she is fit to fly. Whatever the flag is, it has to be a clerical error. If you could just call a supervisor, I'm sure we can clear this up. Brenda didn't even look at his phone. She glanced past him at the growing line of impatient passengers. Sir, you are holding up the line. I am not calling a supervisor for a security override. That comes from above my pay grade. Now, I need you to step away from the podium. We aren't moving until we get an answer, Iris said, her voice cracking. Please, you don't understand. If we miss this flight, my daughter could die. Brenda's eyes narrowed. I'm not going to be emotionally blackmailed today. If you do not step aside immediately, I will call airport security and have you escorted out of the terminal. The words hit Nicholas like a physical blow. Around them, the atmosphere had shifted. Passengers in line were leaning around them, muttering under their breath. Some looked sympathetic, but others were visibly annoyed by the delay. Nicholas saw a man in a business suit roll his eyes and check his Rolex. You're denying us boarding, refusing to tell us why, and threatening us with police? Nicholas asked, the sheer absurdity of the situation testing his immense self-control. We haven't done anything wrong. We just want to get to our seats. Brenda reached for the heavy black telephone mounted on the wall behind the desk. She didn't hesitate. Yes, Gate B22. I have a disruptive family refusing to comply with boarding procedures. I need officers down here immediately. Within 90 seconds, the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots echoed across the terrazzo floor. 2 airport police officers, clad in tactical vests, approached the gate. The taller of the two, Officer Miller, placed his hand casually resting near his utility belt. The visual was clear. Intimidation. What's the problem here, Brenda? Officer Miller asked, barely glancing at the Hayes family before addressing the gate agent. They're flagged in the system as denied boarding, and they're refusing to leave the podium. They're creating a disturbance, Brenda lied smoothly, gesturing toward Nicholas and Iris. A disturbance? Nicholas said, taking a deliberate half-step back, keeping his hands visible and open. Officer, nobody is causing a disturbance. We are just trying to understand why our valid tickets were abruptly cancelled. My daughter is a heart patient. We are traveling for her surgery. Officer Miller finally looked at Nicholas, His eyes were hauled, assessing. "Sir, if the airline says you aren't flying, you aren't flying. This is private property. You need to gather your belongings and move to the customer service desk outside of the sterile area." "If we leave the gate, the plane will leave without us," Iris cried, dropping to her knees to hug Lily, who had begun to whimper at the sight of the armed police. "Please, just look at the computer. Just ask them to look at the computer." A young man in a college sweatshirt a few yards away had pulled out his phone and started recording the interaction. "They aren't even doing anything," the young man called out. "Just let them on the plane." "Back away, folks. Mind your own business," the second officer barked, pointing a stern finger at the college student. Nicholas looked at the boarding door. Passengers were streaming past them now, handing their passes to the second gate agent, entirely ignoring the tragedy unfolding inches away. Every person that walked down that jet bridge was a nail in the coffin of Lily's chances. The desperation clawed at Nicholas's throat. He had spent his entire life playing by the rules, keeping his head down, working twice as hard to get half as far. And now, when it mattered most, the system was actively crushing him. "Officer," Nicholas said, his voice trembling despite his best efforts, "I am begging you, man to man, father to father. I will comply with whatever you want. Just please, get a supervisor down here. Something is wrong." "The only thing wrong here is your refusal to follow a lawful order," Miller said, taking a step closer, crowding Nicholas's personal space. "I'm going to tell you one last time. Pick up your bags and step away from this gate, or you will be placed under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct. And if you go to jail tonight, who is taking your daughter to London?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and venomous. It was the ultimate checkmate. If Nicholas pushed back, if he demanded his rights, he would be in handcuffs, and Lily would have no one. Nicholas closed his eyes. The defeat was a bitter, physical taste in his mouth. He looked down at Iris, who was weeping openly into Lily's yellow backpack. "Okay," Nicholas whispered, his voice broken. "Okay, we're moving." He reached down, gently pulling Iris to her feet. He took Lily's small, fragile hand in his. They slowly walked away from the podium, moving to a row of empty steel chairs about 50 feet away. They sat down, a portrait of profound devastation. Brenda watched them go, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. "Final boarding call for Flight 409 to London Heathrow," she announced cheerfully over the intercom, the contrast of her peppy tone feeling like a knife twisting in Nicholas's gut. 10 minutes later, Brenda grabbed the heavy boarding door handle. She pulled it shut with a loud, definitive clang. Through the glass, Nicholas watched the jet bridge slowly retract from the side of the massive airplane. The ground crew in their neon vests waved their illuminated wands. The Boeing 777's engines whined, a low, deafening roar that vibrated through the glass, and the plane slowly pushed back from the gate. Iris buried her face in Nicholas's chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "We lost it, Nicholas. We lost the appointment. What are we going to do? God, what are we going to do?" Nicholas wrapped his arms around his wife and child, staring blankly at the tarmac. "I don't know," he whispered. "I'll call the clinic. I'll beg them for an extension. I'll call the embassy. We won't give up." But deep down, Nicholas felt a cold, dark void opening up inside him. He pulled out his phone, intending to call the airline's executive hotline to demand an explanation for the flag. He dialed the number, listening to the hold music. Outside, Flight 409 disappeared into the night sky, headed toward the runway for takeoff. 12 minutes passed. 12 minutes of Iris crying softly, of Lily resting her tired head on her mother's lap, of Nicholas listening to elevator music on his cell phone, praying for a customer service representative to pick up. Gate B22 was entirely empty now. The agents had packed up and left. The police officers had moved on to patrol other areas. The terminal had returned to its normal state of chaotic neutrality, people rushing to grab Cinnabon, the distinct rattling wheels of suitcases rolling over tile, the constant hum of overlapping conversations in a dozen different languages, and the soothing robotic voice of the PA system announcing gate changes. Then something strange happened. It started with the PA system. The automated voice mid-sentence, "Passenger Jackson, please report to Gate C," suddenly cut off with a sharp screech of static. Nicholas looked up from his phone. A heavy, industrial alarm sounded. It wasn't the shrill, piercing shriek of a fire alarm. It was a low, digitized honk, 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 that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the building. Around them, people stopped walking. A man carrying 2 coffees froze in his tracks. A family rushing toward the bathrooms paused, looking at the ceiling. Then every single digital departure board in Terminal 4, hundreds of screens lining the walls, hanging from the ceilings behind the bars, flickered violently. The yellow and white text vanished. For 2 seconds, the screens were pitch black. When they came back on, the entire board was bathed in stark emergency red. In bold, massive white letters, a single phrase dominated every screen. Ground stop in effect. All departures halted. Secure in place. "Nicholas," Iris whispered, her tears drying instantly, replaced by a deep, primal confusion. "What's happening?" Before Nicholas could answer, an unprecedented phenomenon occurred. The ambient noise of JFK Airport, a sound generated by 10,000 living, moving human beings, completely vanished. It didn't happen slowly. It happened all at once, as a cascading wave of notifications hit every smartphone in the terminal simultaneously. Bzz, 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 bzz. It was the unmistakable sound of an Amber Alert or a severe weather warning. But it was happening on thousands of devices at the exact same millisecond. Nicholas pulled his phone away from his ear. The hold music had disconnected. On his screen was a breaking news push notification from CNN. But before he could read it, a human voice came over the PA system. It wasn't the robotic announcer. It was a man, and he was out of breath, his voice laced with barely contained panic. "Attention all passengers and personnel. This is airport operations. John F. Kennedy International is currently under a code red federal lockdown. No aircraft are permitted to taxi, take off, or deplane. All passengers in the terminal must remain exactly where they are. Do not approach the windows. I repeat, do not approach the tarmac-facing windows." Human nature being what it is, the moment the voice said not to approach the windows, hundreds of people in Terminal 4 immediately gravitated toward the massive glass walls overlooking the airfield. Nicholas stood up, his protective instincts overriding everything else. He stood between the glass and his family. "Look!" someone down the hall screamed. Out on the tarmac, the darkness was suddenly pierced by an explosion of flashing lights. Red, blue, and tactical white strobes. It looked like a miniature city had just materialized out of thin air. Nicholas squinted through the glare. A massive aircraft had been halted halfway down Taxiway Alpha, miles away from the main runway, but perfectly visible from Terminal 4. It was illuminated by the high beams of at least 30 black, armored SUVs that had swarmed it, cutting off its path. Nicholas's breath hitched in his throat. He recognized the tail fin. He recognized the Airline logo. It was Flight 409. The plane they had just been kicked off of. "Nicholas," Iris said, standing up, clutching Lily tightly to her chest. She saw it too. The terminal was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Nobody spoke. The collective breath of thousands of people was held hostage by the spectacle outside. From the armored vehicles, heavily armed tactical teams in full SWAT gear were pouring out. They weren't moving like standard police. They were moving with military precision, carrying breaching equipment and assault rifles, swarming the underbelly of the Boeing 777. Massive mobile staircase trucks were speeding across the tarmac toward the plane, flanked by bomb squad units. "Oh my God," a woman nearby whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Is it a hijacking?" Nicholas stared at the plane. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. 12 minutes ago, he was begging to be in seat 24A. 12 minutes ago, he thought the world was ending because he couldn't walk down that jet bridge. His phone buzzed in his hand again. He looked down. The news alert on his screen finally loaded. Breaking. Federal authorities intercept London-bound flight at JFK on tarmac, following credible, hyper-specific terror threat. Informants indicate an explosive device was planted directly beneath row 24. Nicholas felt the blood drain entirely from his face. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering onto the hard tile floor. Row 24. He didn't need to look at the boarding passes still crumpled in his jacket pocket to know. Seats 24A, 24B, and 24C. Their seats. They hadn't been targeted by a racist gate agent. They hadn't been the victims of a random computer glitch. Someone, somewhere deep inside a federal intelligence agency, had flagged those specific seats, locking them out of the system at the very last second before the trap could be sprung. "Iris," Nicholas managed to choke out, the realization washing over him with the force of a tidal wave. Suddenly, the eerie silence of the terminal was broken. Heavy, fast footsteps approached from behind them. Nicholas turned around. It was Officer Miller, the same cop who had threatened to arrest them 15 minutes earlier. But his demeanor was completely different. He wasn't swaggering. He was sprinting toward them, flanked by 3 men in dark suits wearing FBI lanyards. Officer Miller stopped in front of Nicholas, his chest heaving, his face pale. The hostility was completely gone, replaced by a look of profound, terrified awe. "Mr. Hayes," the lead FBI agent said, stepping forward, flashing a badge. "My name is Special Agent Vance." Wait, Nicholas thought. No, his name was Special Agent Harrison. "My name is Special Agent Harrison," the man corrected himself quickly. "We need you and your family to come with us immediately. You're not in trouble. But you are the luckiest people on the face of the earth." The transition from the public concourse of Terminal 4 to the subterranean security nexus of John F. Kennedy International Airport was a blur of concrete corridors and heavy, reinforced steel doors. Nicholas carried Lily in his arms, her fragile body completely shielded against his chest, while Iris walked close behind, practically stepping on his heels. They were flanked by Special Agent Harrison and 3 other heavily armed tactical officers. The chaotic din of the panicked terminal faded away, replaced by the sterile hum of heavy-duty HVAC systems. They were ushered into a windowless briefing room, typically reserved for high-level counter-terrorism operations. The walls were lined with blank monitors, and a massive conference table dominated the center. Agent Harrison gestured for them to sit, his demeanor a stark contrast to the aggressive posturing of the gate agent and the airport police just half an hour prior. He looked at them, not as suspects, but as ghosts. People who, by all laws of probability and physics, were supposed to be dead within the hour. "I need some water for my daughter," Iris said instantly, her voice shaking but carrying a fierce maternal edge. "And her secondary medication bag. It's in the yellow carry-on your officers took." Harrison nodded to one of the tactical officers standing by the door. "Get the bag, and bring bottled water, juice, whatever they have in the break room. Move!" The officer vanished, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind him. Nicholas sat at the table, keeping Lily on his lap. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin possessed a frightening, translucent pallor. The sheer stress of the environment was accelerating her physical decline. Nicholas looked across the table at Agent Harrison, who was pulling a secure tablet from his briefcase. "Agent Harrison," Nicholas began, his voice dropping an octave, steadying himself through sheer force of will. "I need you to tell me exactly what is going on out there. My wife and I just watched a SWAT team swarm a plane we were supposed to be on. We were told our tickets were flagged by a security override. What did you find?" Harrison unlocked his tablet, his expression grim. He looked at Nicholas, then at Iris, seemingly weighing how much classified intelligence he was authorized to share. He decided humanity outweighed protocol. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, what I am about to tell you is highly sensitive, but you have a right to know because it directly impacted your lives," Harrison said, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the table. 42 minutes ago, the National Security Agency intercepted an encrypted communication on a dark web forum known to be frequented by a domestic extremist cell. The message was brief. It contained a flight number, a date, and a specific seat coordinate. Harrison paused, turning the tablet around and sliding it across the smooth wooden table toward Nicholas. On the screen was a decrypted text log. Target: Flight 409, JFK to LHR. Row 24. Trigger armed at 10,000 feet. Iris gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. The blood rushed from Nicholas's face as he stared at the digital letters. Row 24. It was too specific to be a coincidence. "We immediately initiated a shadow protocol," Harrison explained, his tone methodical but laced with underlying tension. "The intelligence indicated that an improvised explosive device had been planted directly beneath the floorboards of Row 24. The device was a barometric bomb, designed to detonate automatically once the cabin pressure reached the equivalent of 10,000 feet. If that plane had taken off, it would have catastrophic failure over the Atlantic Ocean. No survivors." "But how?" Nicholas asked, his mind racing, trying to process the magnitude of the horror. "How could someone get a bomb onto a commercial plane in 2026? And why our seats?" "That's what my team is tearing apart right now," Harrison said. "We suspect a compromised aviation mechanic, a man named Gregory Dunn, who had access to the aircraft during its overnight maintenance cycle in a hangar at Newark before it was repositioned to JFK. He managed to bypass standard security screening. As for why your seats, we don't believe you were the targets. The structural architecture of the Boeing 777 places the central wing fuel tanks in close proximity to the floorboards of rows 23 through 25. Placing the charge there ensures maximum devastation." Nicholas looked down at Lily, who was tracing the seams of her stuffed rabbit, oblivious to the fact that her parents were discussing a plot that would have vaporized them in the sky. "The gate agent," Iris whispered, her eyes wide with traumatic realization. "Brenda. She treated us like we were criminals. She threatened to have us arrested." "The gate agent had no idea," Harrison clarified gently. "When the NSA flagged the seats, they triggered an automated, hard-coded override in the airline's global reservation system. It's a fail-safe designed to prevent passengers from boarding a compromised section of an aircraft while counter-terrorism units verify the threat. Brenda's screen simply flashed red with a Level 1 security denial. She didn't know about the bomb. She was just following a computer prompt, albeit with terrible customer service. She stalled us, Nicholas realized, his voice hollow. Her refusal to call a supervisor, her arguing with us, her calling the police, she kept us off that jet bridge. If she had just waved us through like I asked, we would have been sitting directly on top of the device when your tactical teams stormed the plane. In a hostage or bomb threat scenario, the presence of civilians drastically alters the tactical approach, Harrison agreed, his gaze softening. If you had been in those seats, the breachers would have had to secure you while simultaneously disarming a highly unstable barometric trigger. A stray bullet, a sudden movement. The risk of accidental detonation would have skyrocketed. That infuriating delay at the podium. It literally saved your lives. The heavy door opened, and the tactical officer returned, carrying Lily's yellow medical bag, 3 bottles of water, and a carton of apple juice. Iris immediately snatched the bag, unzipping it with trembling fingers, to retrieve a small digital vital signs monitor. "So what happens now?" Nicholas asked, opening the juice box and handing it to Lily. "The bomber didn't target us. The bomb is being disarmed. We survived. But we are supposed to be in London. My daughter has an appointment with Dr. Arthur Penhaligon at the Royal Brompton Clinic at 8 a.m. Thursday. It is the only window he has to operate on her heart. If we don't get there..." Nicholas didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The grim reality settled heavily over the sterile room. They had survived a terrorist plot, only to be handed a delayed death sentence for their child. "The entire airport is under a federal ground stop," Harrison said, shaking his head slowly. "The FAA has locked down the airspace for a 100-mile radius. No commercial flights are leaving JFK LaGuardia or Newark until the sweeping operations are entirely complete and all ground crew personnel are accounted for. That could take 24 to 48 hours. "No," Iris said, her voice cracking as she attached a small, glowing pulse oximeter to Lily's tiny index finger. "No, you don't understand. We have spent 2 years fighting the insurance companies. We sold our cars. We mortgaged our house. Dr. Penhaligon is the only surgeon in the world willing to attempt the arterial switch she needs. We cannot wait 48 hours. The small monitor on Lily's finger beeped. The number on the digital screen read 84%. Iris's breath hitched. "Nicholas, her oxygen." The sudden, rhythmic beeping of the pulse oximeter shattered the tense quiet of the interrogation room. 84%. Normal blood oxygen levels for a healthy child sit comfortably between 95 and 100%. For Lily, who lived in a chronic state of hypoxia, her baseline was typically a fragile 90. But dropping to 84 meant her already weakened heart was failing to pump sufficient oxygenated blood to her organs. The adrenaline, the lack of sleep, and the sheer terror of the airport confrontation had pushed her delicate system over the edge. "Lily, baby, look at Mommy," Iris said, her voice forcefully calm, though her hands shook as she pulled a portable oxygen cylinder from the bottom of the yellow medical bag. "I'm going to put your cannula on, okay? Just breathe in the good air." Lily didn't respond. Her eyes were half closed, her head lolling against Nicholas's chest. Her lips carried a terrifying, faint blue tint. "Agent Harrison," Nicholas snapped, his protective instincts surging into absolute overdrive. "I need a medic in here, now!" Harrison didn't hesitate. He keyed the radio clipped to his tactical vest. "Command, this is Harrison. I have a pediatric medical emergency in interrogation room 4. Suspected cardiac episode. I need an EMT crash team down here immediately. Priority 1. Copy that, Harrison. Medics are en route. ETA 3 minutes. Nicholas wrapped his arms tighter around Lily, holding the oxygen mask gently over her nose and mouth. He looked at the stark white ceiling, a silent, desperate prayer echoing in his mind. Not like this. We didn't survive a bomb to lose her in a windowless room underground. Nicholas, her heart rate is spiking, Iris sobbed, staring at the small monitor. The numbers were climbing erratically, 130, 145, 160 beats per minute. Her tiny, defective heart was racing, trying desperately to compensate for the lack of oxygen. The heavy steel door slammed open. 2 airport paramedics rushed in, hauling heavy red trauma bags and a portable defibrillator. They immediately took over, communicating in clipped, professional tones. They laid Lily flat on the conference table, right over the spot where the decrypted bomb threat had rested moments before. BP is 70/40. Heart rate is 165, the lead paramedic announced. Hooking up medical-grade ECG leads to Lily's chest. She's in distress? Ma'am, what is her primary diagnosis? Transposition of the great arteries with a complex ventricular septal defect, Iris recited rapidly, having memorized the terrifying medical jargon years ago. She is scheduled for an emergency arterial switch in London on Thursday. She cannot handle stress. You need to stabilize her. We're pushing fluids and a mild sedative to bring her heart rate down, the paramedic said, inserting an IV into Lily's frail arm with practiced precision. But she needs a pediatric ICU. We have to transport her to Mount Sinai. If we go to a hospital in Manhattan, we miss the window, Nicholas said, his voice breaking. He looked at Harrison. If she misses this surgery, Dr. Penhaligon's clinic said her heart will fail completely within a month. There are no other surgeons. There is no plan B. Agent Harrison stood in the corner of the room, his jaw tightly clenched. He had spent his entire career hunting down terrorists, dealing with the darkest aspects of human nature. But watching this family, who had just unwittingly foiled a massive terror plot by simply standing at a gate, lose everything, broke something fundamental inside him. Harrison stepped out of the room, pulling out his encrypted smartphone. He didn't call his superior at the FBI. He called the one person who had the authority and the resources to cut through the impossible red tape of a federal lockdown. He dialed the emergency direct line to Richard Callahan. Richard Callahan was the billionaire CEO of the airline they were supposed to fly on. According to the news feeds Harrison had monitored earlier, Callahan had been holding an emergency board meeting at the airline's corporate headquarters just 3 miles from JFK when the bomb threat was intercepted. The phone rang twice before a stern voice answered. "This is a secure line. State your clearance." "This is Special Agent Harrison, FBI Counter-Terrorism Division. I need to speak to Mr. Callahan immediately. It concerns the passengers of Flight 409. A brief pause. Then a new voice came on the line. It was deep, gravelly, and clearly strained by the events of the night. "This is Callahan. Agent Harrison, my legal team has already assured the Bureau full cooperation regarding the mechanic. Done. What else do you need?" "Mr. Callahan, I'm currently sitting in an interrogation room with the family who was booked in row 24, Harrison said, keeping his voice low so Nicholas and Iris couldn't hear. They are the ones who were denied boarding at the gate, which delayed the departure process just long enough for the NSA to flag the flight. Sir, if they had boarded normally, your plane would be at the bottom of the ocean, and your company would be facing the greatest catastrophic loss in aviation history. "I am aware," Callahan said, his tone softening slightly. "I've reviewed the gate logs. We owe that family an unpayable debt. Are they unharmed?" Physically, from the threat? Yes. But, sir, they were traveling to London for a life-saving, highly specialized heart surgery for their 7-year-old daughter. The stress of the lockdown has triggered a cardiac episode. She is currently being stabilized by medics on a conference table. Silence stretched over the line. The FAA has instituted a hard ground stop, Harrison continued, pressing the issue. They will miss the surgery window. Mr. Callahan, this family absorbed the brunt of an attack meant for your airline. They took the hit. I am asking you to help them. Callahan didn't hesitate. The ruthless business acumen that had made him a billionaire was entirely replaced by a sharp, decisive humanity. Agent Harrison, I have a privately owned Gulfstream G650 parked at a private hangar at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Teterboro is outside the immediate JFK lockdown zone. It has medical clearance capabilities. Harrison's eyes widened. Sir, the airspace. I will call the Secretary of Transportation directly. I will get military clearance if I have to. Callahan interrupted, his voice echoing with absolute authority. You get that little girl stabilized. I am sending my personal helicopter to the JFK helipad right now. It will fly them directly to Teterboro, and my jet will have them in London before the sun comes up. Harrison let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, Agent. Just get them to the roof. Harrison ended the call and turned back into the room. The paramedics had managed to stabilize Lily's heart rate, though she was heavily sedated, sleeping peacefully beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Nicholas and Iris were huddled together, crying silently, completely defeated. Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, Harrison said, stepping back to the table. Nicholas looked up, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. Are the ambulances here? We need to go to Mount Sinai. No, Harrison said, a fierce, determined smile breaking across his usually stoic face. You're not going to Mount Sinai. Pack up your bags. The CEO of the airline just dispatched his private helicopter. You are going to London. The journey from the subterranean interrogation room to the rooftop helipad of John F. Kennedy International Airport was a surreal, high-speed blur. Agent Harrison led the charge, his federal badge clearing every security checkpoint instantly. Behind him, the two paramedics rushed a specialized transport stretcher, carrying the sedated, fragile form of 7-year-old Lily. Nicholas and Iris flanked the stretcher, their hands resting protectively on the metal side rails. They burst through the heavy roof access doors into the sweltering July night air. The deafening, rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of a twin-engine Sikorsky S-76 helicopter drowned out any attempt at conversation. The chopper, painted in a sleek, unmarked matte black, hovered briefly before touching down on the illuminated H-pad. Go! Go! Harrison yelled over the roar of the rotors, waving the paramedics forward. The helicopter's side doors slid open, revealing an interior that looked more like a high-end mobile trauma bay than a corporate transport. The paramedics seamlessly locked Lily's stretcher into the floor mounts, hooking her IV lines into the chopper's onboard monitoring systems. Nicholas turned to Harrison before climbing aboard. He grabbed the FBI agent's hand, gripping it with a strength born of pure, unadulterated gratitude. Thank you for believing us, for not treating us like collateral damage. Harrison squeezed Nicholas's hand firmly. You saved hundreds of lives tonight, Mr. Hayes. The absolute least we could do is save one. Now get out of here. Call me when she wakes up. Nicholas nodded, his throat tight, and climbed into the cabin beside his wife. The Sikorsky lifted off the roof with terrifying speed. As it banked sharply to the west, Nicholas looked out the plexiglass window. Below them, JFK was a sprawling grid of paralyzed concrete and flashing emergency lights. He could clearly see Flight 409 still stranded on Taxiway Alpha, completely surrounded by a small army of federal vehicles. It looked like a crime scene out of a dystopian movie. A shiver ran down Nicholas's spine as the image faded into the distance. 12 minutes. That was all that had stood between his family and a fiery end in the sky. The flight to Teterboro Airport in New Jersey took less than 15 minutes, bypassing the gridlocked highways and the locked-down commercial airspace entirely. When the helicopter touched down on the private tarmac, a new, breathtaking sight awaited them. Idling perfectly under the floodlights was a Gulfstream G650. Its engines were already whining with a low, powerful hum, ready for immediate takeoff. Standing at the bottom of the air stairs was a flight nurse in a crisp blue uniform and a pilot holding a specialized manifest clipboard. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes?" the flight nurse asked as the paramedics carefully wheeled Lily down the tarmac. "My name is Sarah. Mr. Callahan has fully briefed us. We have a customized pediatric life support station set up in the aft cabin, and the pilots have secured a direct, high-altitude flight path to Farnborough Airport, just outside London. We are wheels up the second you are strapped in." Iris burst into fresh tears, the overwhelming relief finally breaking through her shock. "Thank you. Oh my God, thank you." The interior of the Gulfstream was a masterpiece of luxury retrofitted for crisis. Cream-colored leather seats and mahogany paneling surrounded a state-of-the-art medical berth where Lily was securely transferred. The private jet's pressurized cabin was meticulously calibrated to maintain sea-level oxygen density, completely neutralizing the barometric threat that commercial flying usually posed to Lily's failing heart. Within 5 minutes of boarding, the massive engines roared to life. The G650 rocketed down the Teterboro runway, pitching upward at a steep, aggressive angle, tearing through the cloud cover. As the jet leveled off at 45,000 feet, far above the commercial flight lanes, Sarah, the flight nurse, offered Nicholas and Iris warm blankets and hot tea. For the first time in 48 hours, the frantic, terrifying adrenaline began to drain from Nicholas's system. He watched the steady, reassuring green line on Lily's heart monitor. "She's stable," Sarah assured them softly, adjusting the IV drip. "Her vitals are actually improving with the cabin pressure. You two should try to sleep. We will be in the United Kingdom in just under 6 hours." Iris leaned her head against Nicholas's shoulder, her eyes fixed on her sleeping daughter. "We were so angry at that gate agent, Nicholas," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. "We thought the world was punishing us. We thought the system was breaking us down again." "I know," Nicholas murmured, wrapping his arm around her. "It felt like a curse." "It was a shield," Iris said softly. "The universe put a wall in front of us because there was a cliff on the other side. We just couldn't see the drop." The Gulfstream G650 touched down smoothly at Farnborough Airport on Thursday morning, precisely at 6:15 a.m. local time. True to his word, Richard Callahan's influence extended across the Atlantic. A private pediatric ambulance, pre-cleared by British Customs, was waiting on the tarmac the moment the jet's doors opened. The drive into central London was a blur of grey skies and historic architecture, but Nicholas and Iris saw none of it. Their entire universe was confined to the back of the ambulance, watching Lily's chest rise and fall. They arrived at the Royal Brompton Clinic at 7:10 a.m. A team of scrub-clad nurses was waiting at the emergency entrance. They took control of Lily's stretcher with practiced, military-like precision, rushing her through the swinging double doors of the surgical wing. Nicholas and Iris jogged behind them, until they were stopped by a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. It was Dr. Arthur Penhaligon. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," Dr. Penhaligon said, his British accent thick but his tone incredibly warm. He placed a steadying hand on Nicholas's shoulder. "I was informed of the extraordinary circumstances of your travel. You made it." Her oxygen dropped into the 80s at the airport, Iris said, the panic returning to her voice. Her heart rate spiked to 160. "Is she too weak for the surgery? Did we do too much damage?" Dr. Penhaligon offered a confident, reassuring smile. "Your daughter is a fighter. We have administered a specialized cardiopulmonary bypass protocol. We are stabilizing her hemodynamics as we speak. The arterial switch is the most complex pediatric thoracic procedure in modern medicine, but it is precisely what I do. You have done your job. You got her here against impossible odds. Now let me do mine." With that, the surgeon turned and disappeared through the frosted glass doors of Operating Theatre 1. The next 9 hours were an excruciating exercise in psychological endurance. Nicholas and Iris sat in the private, quiet waiting room, clutching cold cups of coffee that had long since gone stale. They didn't speak. There were no words left. Every tick of the wall clock felt like a hammer strike against an anvil. To distract themselves, Nicholas turned on the television mounted in the corner of the room. It was tuned to BBC News. The entire broadcast was dominated by the events at JFK. Authorities have officially confirmed the arrest of Gregory Dunn, a senior aviation mechanic tied to a radical anti-government syndicate, the British news anchor reported gravely. Dunn managed to bypass Newark security protocols, planting a highly sophisticated barometric explosive device beneath the floorboards of Flight 409. The FBI confirms the device was set to detonate over the Atlantic. Over 280 passengers and crew were evacuated safely. Airline CEO Richard Callahan released a statement earlier this morning. The screen cut to a press conference in New York. Richard Callahan stood at a podium, looking exhausted but resolute. Today, aviation history avoided its darkest chapter, Callahan stated, his deep voice carrying through the television. But I want to be clear. Our fail-safes worked because of an anomaly at the gate. A family, booked in the exact row where the device was planted, was inadvertently stalled during boarding. That delay, caused by a system flag, gave Federal intelligence the final 60 seconds they needed to lock down the aircraft. That family absorbed immense emotional distress, completely unaware they were standing on the front lines of a terror plot. We owe them our lives, our company, and our profound gratitude. Nicholas stared at the screen, tears silently tracking down his face. He reached out and grasped Iris's hand. They weren't just victims of a terrifying night anymore. They were part of a miracle. At 4:45 p.m., the heavy wooden doors of the waiting room finally clicked open. Nicholas and Iris stood up so fast they nearly knocked over their chairs. Dr. Penhaligon walked into the room. He had removed his surgical cap and mask. He looked exhausted, his scrubs slightly rumpled. But there was a distinct, brilliant light in his eyes. "Dr. Penhaligon," Nicholas choked out, terrified of the answer. The surgeon smiled. It was a wide, genuine, triumphant smile. "The transposition is corrected," Dr. Penhaligon announced, letting out a long breath. "The ventricular septum is patched. We took her off the bypass machine 20 minutes ago, and her heart, her beautiful, stubborn, brand-new heart, is beating perfectly on its own. The blue tint is gone. Her oxygen saturation is resting at 99%. She is going to live a very, very long and normal life." Iris collapsed against Nicholas's chest, letting out a sob so loud and profound it echoed down the sterile hallway. Nicholas wrapped his arms around his wife, burying his face in her hair, crying tears of absolute, unfiltered joy. The weight of 2 years of terror, the nightmare of the airport, the sheer impossibility of their survival, it all washed away in that single, beautiful medical statistic. 99%. An hour later, they were led into the pediatric intensive care unit. Lily was asleep, surrounded by a fortress of monitors and IV poles, but the difference was immediate and shocking. The terrifying, ghostly pallor that had haunted her features since birth was completely gone. Her cheeks were flush with a healthy, vibrant pink. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, steady, incredibly strong rhythm. Nicholas sat in the chair beside her bed, reaching through the rails to gently hold her warm, tiny hand. Iris sat on the other side, softly stroking her daughter's hair. "Hey, little bird," Nicholas whispered, leaning close to her ear. "You did it. We did it." Lily stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. The heavy sedation made her gaze groggy, but she looked at her father, then at her mother. A tiny, tired smile pulled at the corners of her mouth. "Daddy?" she rasped softly. "I'm right here, sweetie," Nicholas said, kissing her knuckles. "Did we miss the big plane?" she asked, her brow furrowing slightly in confusion. Nicholas looked at Iris, tears welling in his eyes once more. But this time, he was beaming. He looked back down at his brave, beautiful daughter. "We did miss it, baby," Nicholas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But it's okay. We caught a better one." Sometimes the universe places a brick wall in your path, not to stop you from reaching your destination, but to prevent you from walking off a cliff you couldn't see. The Hayes family experienced the ultimate humiliation, anger, and despair at that gate, only to discover that their darkest moment was actually their greatest protection. It's a powerful reminder that when doors slam in our faces, it might just be life's way of keeping us safe from the storms we know nothing about. Have you ever had a terrible moment turn into an absolute blessing in disguise? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this real-life drama had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder to trust the timing of their life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible, heart-pounding stories every single week. Until next time, stay safe and trust the journey.